On this episode of Lapeef, Let's Talk.
If you don't got it out the gate that this is the mission of your company, then you really not about it. If you do have it in the mission, what are your goals? And really how you using this to really be transformative in changing or enhancing your organization. So the thing is looking at policy, looking at the way people are hired, looking at the way people are actually penalized at work. You know, you think about like, are people of a certain group identity, are they given more harsher punishments than others?
What is diversity and inclusion? I'm gonna tell you guys a little story. This is a true story, by the way. A little over a year ago, during the one-on-one meeting with the directors of the company, she was asked what projects she wanted to work on next. She said she would be interested in working on diversity and inclusion initiatives. And she was told that it wasn't a priority at the time. Fast forward to today, she just had an annual performance review and was told, given her interest in diversity and inclusion, they would like her to be at the forefront on their next diversity and inclusion endeavor. Given all the attention surrounding social justice and racial equality, do companies feel pressure to focus on diversity and inclusion in their workforce? Be next.
Based on a current state, yes. Because the thing is, sadly, I think they know that this is now impacting their bottom line. This is hurting people in the pockets because of everything that's happening. If you was to ask us that question last year, I don't think there would have been a value. We all know about diversity, equity, and inclusion. But the thing is, we also need to open up our lens. When we think about diversity, we always assume that like, oh, we're just talking about race. How many black people was hired? How many Latinx people was hired? How many Asian people was hired? It's not even about race. It's about all aspects. It's about diversity of gender. It's about breaking down barriers of ageism at the workplace. For far as you being too young, too old, same thing. It's about access to opportunities, looking at your policy. To me, I always look at it, it starts with the mission, right? If you don't have anything that talks about your mission that speaks to diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you really not about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Companies always talk about like, oh yeah, we have this initiative or this task force. That's just smoke and mirrors. The thing is, you put a group of people together, and then there's no actions that come from this. So the thing is, it goes back to how you articulate it. What is it? Old school saying: if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. If you don't got it out the gate that this is the mission of your company, then you really not about it. If you do have it in the mission, what are your goals? And really how you using this to really be transformative in changing or enhancing your organization. So the thing is looking at policy, looking at the way people are hired, looking at the way people are actually penalized at work. You know, you think about like, are people of a certain group identity, are they given more harsher punishments than others? Do the policies that mean, does it even marginalize certain people? Dress codes, hairstyles, everything like that. So when we talk about diversity, I think companies need to look beyond just race. It's bigger than race. Diversity is really all things. It's not unique to just like a particular color. So to me, it goes back to companies right now, they're invested, but I think it's also because of political pressure. But I think it's more timing for it. Something as simple as Juneteenth, right? So the thing is, this showed this past June where companies stood on really about these issues about equity and diversity as it relates to black folks. Do you acknowledge this day? Do you not acknowledge it? And if you do acknowledge it, are you providing any educational workshops and understanding around it? Do they get the time off? Do they not? Because we have other days that we get off, but then it's kind of like, well, why? Why are we doing this? And honestly, I would ask everyone, not right now, but come next year, is Juneteenth going to be celebrated at your company every year, or was this just kind of one-time thing just because of the civil unrest? That's the point where you get to see the true actions behind your company. Is it sustainable?
Hey, Tawana, I had the same question. Now, imagine the scenario, true story. You know, she was
Mm-hmm.
trying to bring the company, she was trying to make the company aware that they needed to focus on diversity and inclusion. Given all the attention
Yeah.
surrounding social justice and racial equality, do companies feel pressure to focus on diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think to her point, they didn't really decide to address the diversity and inclusion issue until there was something socially that happened within the communities and there was a demand for it, right? So I feel like companies that I've worked for, and I have, worked for predominantly Black companies for most of my career, and even the career that I'm in now is, predominantly African Americans that work in my department. So I think that diversity and inclusion has always been a part of our entire structure. And inclusion, like B. Nick said, it extends beyond race. It's you know, your sexual preferences. It is your heritage. Celebrating not just you know uh, Black History Month, but Cinco de Mayo and Asian Heritage Month, and just being inclusive in all the different races that exist, and being aware that there are different people in this world and there's different things going on, and I love that we have this specific like department, and it's compartmentalized, and we have a department that's dedicated specifically to telling us about things that are going on in different cultures, in different communities, in different, around Chicago, around the world, and just being inclusive in our communities. Because even when we have, pictures of professionals, it's always gender basis, right? Like a man is wearing a suit, women, we may be wearing a suit, but it may be a dress, right? It may be a skirt, it may be different things. And so we don't often leave room for, people who identify as transsexual or people who identify as lesbian, and, they may not want to wear a dress, right? Or people who identify as gay and he may not want to wear a pantsuit, a three-piece pantsuit. So like we don't really leave room for people who are professionals that really don't identify as our sexual orientation. So inclusivity is extends beyond just a race or how you identify yourself, ethnicity and heritage. It is so much more. And a lot of companies have dropped the ball on being that emphasis in diversity in the workplace. And a lot of people are criticized for some of the cultural things that they do just in their culture, and it has absolutely nothing to do with being a professional, being in a workplace, and there's no code of conduct surrounding it. But people do have a lot of criticism surrounding your behavior and the way you decide to maybe food you eat, or the way you want to dress, or what if your religion doesn't allow you to wear your hair in public, and so you may want to cover it up. And so a lot of people kind of criticize those individuals. So I think that emphasis is always necessary, but because of all of the movements that are happening, a lot of times, companies need that push. They need that motivation in order to make sure that they are complying with, making sure people have an inclusive environment and that they feel comfortable in their workplace. And shame on that company for not letting, her, create some sort of diversity plan and some sort of inclusion plan that would have got ahead of this whole entire movement, and she wouldn't have never even had to change anything, which is like my company. We already had diversity plans in place. We already addressed those issues. So it was no need to adjust based on whatever's happening socially. We already made sure that the environment was inclusive and that we embraced other cultures and understood, how diverse America is in general. And so if you're ignorant to that, if you're ignorant to the fact that there are a lot of different people and diverse communities in America in general that you need to embrace, then you're going to have an issue with bringing diversity into the workplace and inclusion in the workplace. So I absolutely feel like it's necessary. Companies feel the pressure now, and so they're being like reactive instead of proactive. And so I don't agree with that because I feel like they're just doing a filler, right? Like just trying to fulfill a requirement right now and not really and truly embracing the whole entire atmosphere of, you know, being inclusive and being diverse and just really making sure that that is the type of environment that they're fostering. I think that a lot of people are just reacting to whatever's happening out in the world and trying to appease people instead of really believing in the mission and believing in that. Because I believe that that's something that we should look at and that is important in the workplace.
Hey, Anton, I couldn't imagine going to my annual performance review and they gave me a 5, but only later to find out that I was supposed to get a 3, but they only gave me a 5 due to everything that was going on. Given all the attention surrounding social justice and racial equality, do companies feel pressure to focus on diversity and inclusion in their workplace?
So I'm going to, and I think I'm just going to speak once and then let it be because I'm completely the opposite of B Nix and Tawana, not even just for the sake of this podcast, but because I really believe this, right? I'm going to speak once and I'm going to validate what I'm saying and why I'm saying it, and then I'm just going to leave it at that. So I'm speaking from the perspective of a person, obviously, that come from, I was literally raised in the hood too, right? I'm also speaking from the perspective that worked his way all the way up to the top. So I was in executive leadership of Fortune 500 companies. And I'm also speaking from the perspective of a person that not only was an active owner of companies that hired people, because I was the person that 100% owned the company, but also as an active investor and a minority owner, and sometimes a majority owner of startups and businesses that are already existing. I can't understand for the life of me, for example, why sexual orientation is something that needs to be captured in the workplace, for example. Let's just say, hypothetically, I have this Fortune 500 company. I'm there to do a job, not have conversations about my sexual orientation. My sexual orientation has nothing to do with my ability to be able to close a mortgage, for example. Why is that something that needs to be discussed in the workplace? I don't understand how. And the other issue that I have is we only discuss diversity and inclusion because we're Black. And I don't see companies, for example, there's a specific company that I have friends that consult for that I chose not to participate in because it's 100% all Black. Guess what? There's no conversations about diversity and inclusion because they all look like each other. It's reverse racism. Like it's a reverse. We don't require from ourselves the thing that we require from other people. Another quote or something else that was stated that is not accurate is that companies are benefiting as a result of diversity and inclusion or marketing the diversity and inclusion that they have within their company. And I would say it's the complete opposite. The overwhelming majority of these companies that decide to politicize or take up political causes that's championed by either side are suffering. For example, you can take Nike. Sales have fallen absolutely off the cliff. You can take any one of these NBA games, NFL games. Guess what? This finals and this playoffs, although people have nothing to do and are less inclined to actually get out because it's a pandemic, the viewership is down more than 68%. Like people are taking a stance against people doing these things that are not only not championing diversity and inclusion, but is excluding people as a result of you trying to meet a certain criteria in order to satisfy what we think is a certain group of people. So, for example, I see within one of the things that people are not addressing because it's not the popular subject right now is that they're discriminating against Asians in college settings because they say that their grades are too high and that the overwhelming majority of them are getting in all of the slots because they have achieved all of the academic progress needed and exceeded that in order to get admitted into the highest universities, whereas we feel like there should be more people that look like us on campus. And so as a result, universities are saying, okay, we can only let so many of this group into this specific organization, such as Harvard and the Yales, so on and so forth. They're only letting so many Asians in. and they're saying because we need to fulfill this particular quota, not how can we have conversations about how we can improve the scores amongst these particular, Black people or whatever like that. That's not the conversation. The conversations are, why aren't more Black people in this particular organization? So as a person that has built companies from scratch and hired people, I would say that I was 100% focused not on color, not on racial bias or genders. I wasn't focused on whether you was a man or a woman. I wasn't focused on your sexual orientation. I was going to implement policies that said, if you don't like my company, you can go and do what you want to do. You don't have to work here. You don't even have to apply. You can choose to go and build your own company. You can put your own money up. You can build whatever you want to do and do whatever you want to do. But what you're not going to do is walk up in here and tell me how you going to wear your hair. This is the standard. This is what I expect because this is what I want in my specific company. This, for example, is a restaurant. I want you to have your hair wrapped up because we don't want hair in the food. I don't care if you want to show off how purple and big your hair is at that specific day. I have a standard because I'm trying to meet expectations set by the health and administration, set by the codes within my specific county that says when an inspector come in, they want to see certain things and I don't want to get penalized financially as a result of it. I'm setting standards based off of expectations that I'm trying to get from this company that I invested my own money in. You don't get to come in and say what you gonna do in my company. I put my own money up. I invested in it. So now you say just because you work here or you get a job, which you can choose to not work here or not, nobody is forcing you. It's not forced labor. You want to determine how I'm going to run my company. No, you are more than welcome to set your own company and determine what you want to do in the places that you want to invest your own money in. So when you see a lot of these diversity and inclusion, I do think that there is benefits to making sure that we are familiar and embracing other cultures. I do think that there's benefits to working with people that don't look like you. But what I don't want to do is discriminate against other people as a result of me trying to meet a quota and saying that people can do what they want and determine how I'm going to run my company or how I'm going to move in my as an executive person of leadership in this particular company based off of the fact that you feel a certain way and not based off of logic that we are supposed to be inclusive of everybody across the board. Don't matter what color you are, don't matter what gender you are, don't matter, what your sexual orientation is. I expect you to perform a certain way. If you meet that criteria, if you are great, if you're awesome, I want you, not because of what you look like, but because of the content of your character and what you bring as value to the company. That's what the conversation should be. And you're seeing a lot of these companies suffering because they picking sides instead of being neutral and being strict on their policies as it relates to what their standards are instead of bending based off of how people feel at that particular time. So that's my thoughts on it from that perspective. I don't agree with it whatsoever. I think that we should be more focused on improving people's lives and showing where we can make progress in areas where there's a large group of people that are suffering. But I don't think that we should have basically reverse discrimination against people that may not necessarily see it the same way you do because they're not the same color as you.
Hey, B Nix, do you agree with Anton when he says that companies are losing on focusing? No, you don't, Tawana?
No.
Why?
I mean, but it don't matter how we feel about that. We can.
That's not true. It's not true.
Margins.
Inclusion is exactly what he said. It's making sure that everyone, regardless of all those things that we've listed, feel like they can come into an atmosphere, and that does not exempt people from the rules. It does not say, oh, because you're in this class and you relate to this individual that you don't have to follow the rules and that you don't have to perform the duties on the same level that another person. No, that's not what.
But it shouldn't be a class. That's my whole argument.
No,
it shouldn't be classes.
It is a class because there's different people who exist in this world, and so if a transsexual person comes into an organization, they're not going to look like me or you, but they may not. right? So are we creating a room in the space for another type of professional who may come in and they may not necessarily fit a mode of what we believe professionalism is, but they may be an amazing employee? Are we going to automatically discriminate because they don't fit into a gender role or into a particular
But see, that's not my argument. I
and
never
that
said
is
that
the
we should
argument.
discriminate.
That's what
Nobody said
inclusion
that we
is.
should discrimination should not exist is my point. But
Right.
my point is that it doesn't become an issue until you make it an issue. Most companies have an HR policy that says we should not discriminate. That has nothing to do, for example, if you are a transsexual person and you come in and saying, I'm a transsexual person. I don't go into work and say, I'm a heterosexual person. That should not be the conversation. We're here to close mortgages. We're here to sell burgers. We're here to do whatever we got to do, but we're not here to have conversations about your sexual orientation.
The rules exist.
That's not what it is.
The rules exist for a reason. It's because people have been discriminated against in the past, and that's why inclusion and diversity is an issue. And that's why we need to have emphasis on it, and that's why people have made such a huge, argument about it. Because there's been multiple instances that are beyond the HR control, which beyond
But I
whatever.
noticed you just completely glossed over the reverse discrimination, how a lot of people don't get the opportunities that they've rightfully earned and that they get pushed out of the conversation as a result of us trying to push a narrative and support this whole politicized movement that also discriminates against people that may have rightfully earned that conversation. We just completely glossed over that. We don't even address that. You don't even talk about that whatsoever.
No, they
Nix.
it. Yeah.
Hey, Nix. I want you to chime in on this conversation. And what I'm hearing is that Anton is saying that it's reverse racism, and I'm here to want to say that there are some unfair things happening, and that's the reason why these rules are put into place. Is there a way that you think that we can kind of balance this all out? Because I do feel like there are some people that are actually working and they're not getting noticed because of everything that's going on. But it just seemed like it's pulling from all type of different ways. Like, do you have anything that we can that companies could probably do in order to try to balance this out to make it fair?
Well, I think it's about what we just talked about. It's about inclusion, right? And the thing is, we can't pick and choose who to include and who not to include. I think from my vantage point, I think Anton was more so looking at it if I'm in private sector, which I still believe that they should align with the same kind of approach that public sector does look at it from, like, at least from the job or organizational aspect. But there, regardless of what you're selling, you want your consumers to feel comfortable and you want them to be inclusive. You want them to feel as if I can do business with you. When we start putting up these guardrails of what you can and can't do and who we do and do not serve, then it's a slippery slope. Because the thing is, even though this is 2020, that's probably the same approach that a white person had about a black person in the 1960s. And I would say that just even going to school, and Tawana, like we went to University of Illinois, and there was, the Project 500.
Project 500,
which was in 1968, in which they had historically not enrolled more than 500 students. So this was part of an initiative, but also part of that, which still holds present day, Black folks were not allowed to participate in the commencement. And to this day, our Big Ten University of Illinois, they still have separate graduations. They have their own commencement. They have a Black commencement. They have an Asian and Pacific Islander commencement. They have Hispanic Latinx commencement. So the thing is, it shows that this was necessary to be an innovation to say, all right, since we can't participate in the actual commencement for the college, we're going to create our own. So the thing is, it was by aspect of having inclusion. And I think right now, when we even think about that movement, right? So we think about that movement in the 60s, that was like civil rights movement, right? We have the Office of Civil Rights. And not to necessarily support what Anton is saying, but to kind of shift it a little bit, that civil rights, the Office of Civil Rights is not the office for Black folks, right? The Office of Civil Rights is really for all people. And one of the things that comes up right now is based on aspects of oppression. When we think about oppression, it's the individual level about how I just personally feel. It's the cultural oppression. And that's the part that you see this happens at the workplace. It's the level of bias that happens at the workplace that people don't talk about it. They're like, well, I don't want to serve that person, or I don't want to talk to that person, or, because such and such is homosexual, I don't want to work with that person. Or this person's friend. So it goes down the list. So now you can't have a decorum of being able to work in a collegial setting because of the fact you have this cultural oppression. Then it speaks to the institutional oppression. I'm a heterosexual man. But the thing is, we know for a fact, going back to what Tawana mentioned about your sexual orientation, guess what? If you work as an employee, you get healthcare benefits and you have a family plan. But guess what? If you're homosexual and you're married, you could then now say like, oh, well, you don't have access to the same benefits as a heterosexual couple because you're homosexual. So now that speaks to the level of institutional oppression based on just the operation of getting health care. That me and you are doing the same job. Like you said, Anton, we're here to do our job. But now I can't get the same benefits, but yet because of who I chose to marry.
My sexual preference,
Yeah, so
my family can't be covered because I didn't make the lifestyle choice that you made. And I don't think that's fair.
So then it's like you gotta lie to say like, oh, well, I'm single, and really you're not single. And we know we're talking about federal funds and privatized healthcare that works with these companies. And now it's like something as simple as that, I don't get the same healthcare. That's not right. So the thing is, it goes beyond just the color of our skin, but it shows like, well, what does the company stand? Are they okay with it? Like, well, you can't be gay. Technically, you can. Same thing that's happening now with the legalization of cannabis, right? The thing is, you can say like, oh, we can't hire you because you didn't pass your drug screening test. Right now, that's why Illinois packaged it under equity as far as not just legalizing cannabis. But guess what? I don't have the right to deny you a job because of drug screening, because it's legal. Somebody may say, like, to this day, they may say, well, that ain't right.
It's not legal federally. Federally, it's not legal.
But see, to that point, you just said being able to run your own business, right? Does that impact whether someone can do the job or not? We're not saying somebody's coming to work under the influence. It's the same thing as drinking. Same policy. Guess what? You can't come to work drunk. You can't come to work high. As far as what you do outside of work, that's what you do. So the thing is, this is the aspect of being inclusive about how we treat our employees, for one, how we hire them, how we have retention of employees, and how we serve our customers. So the thing is, Anton, I know you're looking at it from the aspect of like, hey, this is my company. I do what I want. But the thing is, I'm looking at it from the aspect of both public and private sector. We still have consumers in which we serve our community in which we reside. So the thing is, we got to do right by our consumers. Because the thing is,
but B. Nix, here's the thing. I'm not disagreeing with the overwhelming majority of what you're saying. I'm agreeing in that discrimination is wrong. I'm agreeing that gay couples, and as far as I know, from an HR perspective, if you are a married gay couple, you get the exact same benefits as a heterosexual couple.
That's recent. That's recent, though. Mm-hmm.
I know that's something that I think was a good thing.
Yeah,
I'm not saying diversity and inclusion is a bad thing. I'm agreeing that everybody should be on the same page. The part where I'm disagreeing, and not necessarily with you, B. Nix, because, and I not you either, Tawana, I'm not saying that diversity and inclusion is a bad thing. It's a great thing. But what I'm saying is anything can become a bad thing if you push too hard on the other side. Because a lot of the conversation also, and I think that every part of the conversation should include every aspect. So who are we pushing out, for example, right? Are we having conversations not just about a diversity and inclusion, but are we then starting to discriminate against other people, such as the example where I indicated where a lot of Asians, and that's actually, you can look that up, and I'm talking to the audience, you can look that up and you can Google it. There's a lot of Asians that are no longer being admitted because there are quotas that need to be met according to these standards. So if we're saying we're not going to discriminate, how do we then discriminate and determine whether or not we're going to let somebody else in?
Well, to that point, I agree with you, but that's why it goes back to your mission, your goals, your policy, your outcomes. Because the thing is, we can't gloss over this. And the thing is, companies are not prepared to say, well, what do we do about this? Because then now it became one of those, like, what about black folks? Then now it's like, oh, well, what about Latinx and Hispanic culture? The thing is, like, Asians are also, regardless regardless of whether people feel they're not a real minority, they're still a minority in a sense as far as ethnic groups in our society. But the thing is, it never comes up in the conversation. We only talk about blacks and Hispanics. That's it. So then now, guess what? If I'm Asian and Asian, that could be Indian, that could be Japanese, all different aspects of their country. Yeah. The thing is, may say like, well, my name don't even come up. So guess what? I don't feel included in the conversation. Because the thing is, folks want to talk about, like you said, Hispanic Heritage Month and Black History Month. But the thing is, do all the damn months then. We can't continue to pick and choose which groups based on our group identity that we support and which ones we don't support. Same thing if I'm Jewish. I'm going to say, you know what? Like, hey, you know what? With the different holidays, hey, you could take off of that. But based on if you're from another like group identity you belong to, we're not giving you any time off.
Listen, I learned a hard lesson because I was 24 in management, you know, and I was supervising 13 people at 24 years old. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh my God, like, and so I think I sent email and I said Merry Christmas to the staff, right? And there was a Jewish person in my office, and I did know that he was, but I had no idea, you know, that would offend him, and it did. And he was like, "Look, I don't celebrate." Now, mind you, I work in a predominantly Black organization, but that doesn't mean that there isn't different communities and different, you know, we're just the predominant. We may be 60%. There's Hispanic, there's Asian, there's other cultures, right? And so he's Jewish and he's like, you know, I'm very offended by this because I don't celebrate this. And you sent this to everyone as if I'm supposed to respond. And I was totally caught off guard, you know, being new to management. That was my first lesson on inclusion. And
it's about appropriate language.
It's appropriate language. And I felt like you cannot just feel like everyone is, you know, on board with Christmas and New Year's. And, you know,
but no, I agree with you.
You know,
it's a level of education around it.
I disagree with that whatsoever.
Once folks are educated, you can't look the other way, say I didn't know. Because the thing is, it's a gender bias as well, as far as pay rates. And the fact is,
see, that's where I disagree, fam.
It's true because we know for a fact, even though quiet.
You see, disagree with what? What you disagree with?
Can I make this one point? Then I give it back to Anton.
I want to hear it.
But the aspect of ageism, how people are hired. Yeah. I want to mention a good point about being at a certain age of 24. That was not like a humble brag or anything like that. That's great for her. But at the same time, we've been in those situations where, you know what, somebody say like, you know what, Anton, you can't do the job, not because you're not capable, but you wet behind the ears. Yep. And the thing is, that will be a sole reason why they don't offer you the job, because somebody on the committee thinks you're too young to do the job. Or guess what? You have just a little bit too much experience. That means, guess what? You're too old. We don't want to hire you because guess what? That means that you might be retiring soon, and I'm going to be on the hook for some post-retirement benefits. And the thing is, that shows how messed up our hiring process is, that people are discriminated against with even getting the job to work for the company based on things that are beyond their control. I can't control my age, whether I'm old or young. But the thing is, we've seen it in the past, hairstyles, right? Remember when being Black, where if you wore dreads, it's like, oh no, you got to cut your hair if you're trying to interview. Well, why? And we seen it in sports, where we seen in high schools where like kids would have to shave their head in order to participate in a wrestling match because they're participating in a certain tournament in which they're the minoritized group. This goes way beyond just so many things.
When I've been in my industry for 14 years and I'm super knowledgeable about what I do, but I had braids. I got braids like midway through. I may have worked there for a couple months and then I got braids. And the guy who I managed, he was like, we had a good rapport. So I think he felt comfortable with me. He was like, you know, you look more professional when you don't wear braids. You know what I mean? Like, why are you, you know, when you wear braids, like, I feel like you kind of not as professional as you are.
And think about it, beards that used to be professional work either.
But I'm like, dude, I'm the same person whether I have braids or not. Like, I'm professional. I know what I'm doing. I got the same knowledge. But to him, I presented to him as if, because I had braids, I was more
white,
aligned, huh?
He was what?
presented. He was he was he was Puerto Rican. He was Puerto Rican actually. He was not white, but he was Puerto Rican, you know, and so he felt like he felt that he needed to tell me that I looked more professional when I wear my hair like this. He's like, why don't you wear your hair straight? You look more professional.
Right. And that speaks
And
to
he
now.
said that to me.
That shows the levels of oppression, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, you don't know
Right.
for a fact that that level of bias has now prevented Tawana from being able to apply for a future job within the company or being talked about within the company. Because now, guess what? You know what? I'm going to make it uncomfortable for you, and I'm going to force you out, so I don't got to deal with this no more. We know things like this happen. And the thing is, you know what? If anything, it starts in the school setting. School and workplace settings are the main locations where the level of implicit bias take place, because you have a group of people who technically are all coming from different neighborhoods having to coexist in a space for the majority of the day. That's where most of this lives at, in school settings and in workplace settings. I know for a fact, when I was in college, I had an instructor. She was from Bangladesh. The first thing she said, hey, I had like a dog tag, right? The first thing she said, we're going to talk today about your medallions and how you all have children at the age of 12, right? And the thing is, I was like, so I'm the only other black person, me and the other guy, we looked at each other like, who is she talking to about having babies at the age of 12? But the thing is, it's like,
Exactly.
I got to sit here and listen to this lady for a whole semester knowing that she already has a bias against me because I'm black.
That's right.
And the thing is, guess what? I had to sit there, right? I need this class, right? And the thing is, like, where do I go to empower myself? So that's the point of having this diversity, equity, and inclusion, these committees and these task force, and actually having authenticated with the mission, goals, strategic plans. Because the thing is, guess what? I had no space I could go to. Because the thing is, if I go somewhere, what do I have? What policy do I have to say, she discriminated against me?
My
so
hair,
the thing is, you got to give folks their voice.
My hair had no bearing on whether I was able to, I had the ability to do the job. And the thing is, I really had got my braids because I was working out during that time and I wanted to keep my hair looking a certain way. And I think that people made that assumption, and it was so unfair to judge me based on the way my hair looked, because I literally had so much knowledge, so much experience in that particular department. And honestly, it didn't affect me moving forward, but it just really bothered me that someone felt the need to tell me that I should look a certain way in order to present presentable. And I think that that's why diversity and inclusion is necessary. That's my
opinion. Anton, I know you had disagreed with B. Nix when he stated something earlier, and I periodically saw you shaking your head. You want to chime in on this conversation?
No, that's some of that simp talk that he was talking about, right? You know, that's that simp talk, right?
You know, because like for example, if you look in healthcare, right? Women overwhelmingly dominate healthcare. Should we be placing that on the pedestal or bringing that to the front of the church and saying, yo, we got to get more men in healthcare because women, they dominate it. They make more money than men in this specific aspect. Or are we having this conversation and saying, you know what? Women just are naturally better than men in most respects as far as what they are interested.
I hope this is like a scenario and not
what
how
they
you
are
feel.
interested in as it relates to their overwhelming, caring, and nurturing nature. They thrive in this specific environment. I know specific jobs that require you to be able to lift 80 pounds minimum. And there is a lot of women that had complained about it and said, well, the minimum should be lower. I'm sorry. So does that mean that the people that can lift 80 pounds, they're going to make the exact same money as you, but they have to lift the overwhelming majority of the heavier packages while you can't lift 80 pounds and you have to lift less? So you see what I'm saying? It's called over civilization. And what happens is when we start to try to equalize to the point beyond equal for all, and we start to push beyond those limits, what happens is we start to discriminate unknowingly and unnecessarily against other people that may not necessarily even need to be in that position in the first place. So what I'm saying is we always, and I see this, and again, I'm agreeing with a lot of the narrative behind B. Nix and Tawana. There are some things that I do disagree with that they are saying, but the thing that I don't like that they do, which is a reflection of a lot of people that have these conversations, is they don't talk about both sides of the coin. They only talk about the side that they feel like they are most passionate about, the thing that they want to trumpet and highlight. But I don't think that they're objective enough to admit and address both sides of the coin. For example, civil rights and the affirmative action movement was necessary at the time that they were established because there was a clear bias and a clear discrimination against a certain set of people. Now, in 2020, are we still having the conversations of how necessary it is and how it's overcompensating for people that may not be prepared to go into a certain setting, such as a college setting? There are people that are flunking out of certain universities because they met a quota and they didn't necessarily meet the criteria for being able to get in on their own merits. And so that's what I'm saying, is that let's include all of the parts of the conversation into the conversation, and not just the part that we want to champion because we like this part, but we want to leave that part out. I like it when, and I hate to go here, but I see it when people, like, for example, they quote the Bible, right? They only like certain parts of it. They don't like the whole thing. I'm gonna pick this part and I'm gonna pick this part, but I don't like that part. It's almost like if I say something is a sin, then it's a sin on both sides. Like, I don't pick and choose which part is and which part isn't according to how I feel at the time. I have an uncomfortable conversation about even the parts that I don't like because I'm including the entirety of it into the conversation. So I may like, even be wrong, or I may even be, I'm open to the possibility that I may be wrong about some things. But at the same time, I know I'm right about the idea that I'm inclusive about the entire conversation and not just the parts that I see and that I want to trumpet and highlight based off of the subject that we're talking about right now. That's the problem that I'm having.
Listen, Anton, it's like our podcast. We all have different perspectives. We can't please everyone. I think that when it comes to this world, we approach it in the same way. It's like we know that all these issues exist, but can we literally please everyone? No. So it comes down to demographic and it comes down to population, right? Let me control the population. We have a huge Hispanic population. We have a huge Black population. And depending on your geographic location, you have to target the specific audience that you have to target. And that is, I think, what diversity and inclusion tries to do. It says, hey, you know what? We have 13% African-American people in this, community that we serve. We need to make sure that we are inclusive in these areas. And I think that is the smart way to do it, because you can't do it any other way. You have to use critical data.
But again,
you have to be smart about the approach.
But see, that's the part. I'm objective, so I agree. I'm not discounting that at all.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is there are some circumstances. For example, if you own Tawana's Love Factory. I see the love in the back of the background, right? You got Tawana's Love Factory, and you know that you got two candidates, right? Mm-hmm. And one of them is Black and one of them is white.
Yeah.
For example, right? And let's just say hypothetically, and this is obviously never the case, or not always the case, but let's say the white candidate is a little bit better as far as their credentials or what they bring to the table. They interview better, whatever, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But then at the same time, the overwhelming majority of the people that's in Tawana's Love Factory is not an accurate reflection of the community that you serve.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you do as an owner, not as a worker, but as a person that's actually responsible for the well-being of the company? What do?
You pick the most qualified person.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all I'm saying is that
we
do need to be conscious of the communities that we serve and the populations that's affected by our decisions on a regular basis. And we need to educate people on, being, like, for example, when you gave the example about you being 24 and being conscious of the people that are, a part of your current environment and your culture. However, we also need to make sure that people are not discriminating against other people as a result of these policies in which we're implementing and that we're championing, that we know are good. But just like anything, it's like the internet, right? The internet is supposed to be a good thing. It's an information highway. It's a great way for us to connect. We can link up with our people.
Yeah.
But it's super toxic if you go to this one part and we need to make sure that that part does not infect what our general purpose was to be good and create this good thing for the benefit of us all. That's all I'm saying.
I hear you. When I was like taking my concealing carry class, the officer, he was like, you can turn from a victim to a perpetrator really quickly, right? Like you can be in one moment you think you're a victim, but then you're a perpetrator, right? You're the one who's actually initiating aggression. So I hear you in that if we're so inclusive that we forget about that population of people who really operate on a different mindset and really are structured and really have these different things in place, are we really being inclusive, or are we kind of unconsciously, neglect a certain group of people? You know what I mean? And I do identify with that, because I think I tend to be a little traditional in some ways, and I don't want to be so inclusive that you forget that I'm existing, that I have these values, right?
But the thing is, Tawana, you mentioned just at this class, there still was a level of education. Because the thing is, folks have to be able to be in a setting in order to dedicate themselves to being a learner. Because the thing is, like, what is it? The saying, hey, I adopt the mindset of my oppressor. And the thing is, as much as black folks talk about white folks, then when we're no longer the minoritized group in which we then rank as majority, then what do? We take that same approach and then marginalize other people when we become the majority. So the thing is, I'm not going to title that as reverse racism like you mentioned earlier, but it's to the same outcome that you're talking about, that even if I'm black and I'm viewed as a minority in our like just westernized society of the United States, the thing is, my neighborhood is still all black. So the thing is, then guess what? If somebody that's the minority enters my space, then guess what? I'm going to not provide them with the same access and opportunities. They're going to be treated differently. So the thing is one of those that folks need to check it at the door. But we can't have it both ways. So, Anton, the only part that I'm feeling you is that about the having it both ways piece. But to me, you mitigate that by educating people. If you're not dedicating yourself to educating people on the entire spectrum, that's why we said it's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not the equality piece, but really about being equitable. Because when you're equitable, you're more malleable in understanding it by situation. Equality, that means across the board, like you said about it's a quota, right? And that's the thing where I think folks are shifting from equality, because it's a quota, like, oh, I got to have so many black people, I got to have so many Asian people, I got to have so many Hispanic. Oh, yeah, I already got enough white folks, so I can't hire no more white people because I got to make sure these two. So now it's like your criteria has now flipped, where now you're compromising, I guess, quality, for lack of better words, to meet a quota versus a number. And now it becomes, this is a compliance activity now.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, and then
Agreed.
I don't even want to work there, because then now I'm looking at it like I'm just a head count. You didn't even want me here anyway. I still want to be valued, that I earned the right to be able to work here, or to be able to say that I want to do business here. Give me that choice. Don't say like, the only reason you're here because we needed some more darker skinned brothers, or we. Same thing with gender. Like, hey, it's women truck drivers, but like, hey, they still got to be able to do the job. We're not saying like, hey, Tawana, we're going to hire you as a truck driver just because, company said we don't got enough women to drive trucks, and we're not going to get this grant money. We're getting these new trucks in unless we hire some more women. And the thing is, if that's the way your company is leading, then that's the wrong way. That's not mission driven.
I agree.
That's not
100%.
about your consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
I don't disagree at all.
I've been in management since 24. And so I've been kind of in this position where they pretty much have said to me, like, I have to hire people based on a requirement that they have to fulfill. And so I have a small, pool of people that maybe not even qualify for the position, that I have no choice but to, hire, because I have to meet this 30% criteria that, the company has or whatever. And I totally understand that perspective.
You know what, though?
And I disagree with it.
Can I say one thing? In our society, we still are biased about it every day, and we still haven't done nothing about it. There's a level of privilege that you're a full-time employee working somewhere versus a part-time employee. It's split down the middle about the level of rights that a full-timer has versus a part-timer. And the thing is, guess what? As a society, everybody's looking the other way on it. people are afforded different opportunities. They have even this opportunity to talk and the space to operate. They could mess up all that. But if they full time, okay, we just gonna tell you about it. If you part time, this is the last day you will be working here. And that's the part that shows just a level of bias that our society still treats employees based on job codes. It's crazy, but it's real. But if we don't talk about it, nothing's gonna change. I mean, much as folks hated Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, or whatever you want to call it, guess what? Hey, at least you could say that there was some institutional investment in ensuring that part-timers have at least access to affordable health care versus just saying like, oh, well, hey, I'm giving you 40 hours a week, but since you consider part-time, your hours are your hours, and that's it. You don't get nothing else.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And I've been one of those people. I just got the hours, and I'm thinking in my mind like, oh, I'm getting full-time money now. But then you look at it like, I'm not getting the benefits that come along with full-time. Because then if something goes wrong, guess what? My hours getting cut. If I'm full-time, I got to guarantee you your hours.
B-Nix, thank you for like bringing some of those things to light, because I think we don't think about the impact that diversity and inclusion have. I really like to hear, your perspective on those types of issues. Like, you brought so many things that I thought about in my career and things that decisions I've had to make unconsciously, not even thinking about inclusion and diversity in my decisions. So I do appreciate that perspective.
I appreciate you too, Anton. Certain aspects.
Yeah, Anton.
No, listen, I think that everything a lot of things that y'all was saying, I would say 90-95% of what y'all said, I 100% agree with. I just felt like it was needed for me to give it from a different perspective as a person that, literally have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money only for somebody to come in and tell me, in this one business venture, I invested like over $114,000 in less than a year into it, bought it out, everything, built it up. And then somebody going to tell me what they ain't going to do and what they going to do. And it's like, what?
Right. Like what you mean?
Like, who you talking to? Like,
I feel you, Anton. But you know what, though? I hate the way you frame information when you it hurts me. And the thing is, you
knew it was coming. Anton
have a good point, but his framing be like, no, I can't.
But you know what? You know why I gotta frame it like that is because I don't think that people that are like small business owners and business owners in general and stuff, nobody is having a conversation with them and saying, well, how do you feel about it? And conversations are, when they're so one-sided because somebody is only speaking from one perspective, and you're not, and that's why I called it a conversation. A conversation is, contributing and receiving on both sides. We get to hear it on all sides. But when we only hear it from the perspective of the person that, and I'm not talking about y'all in particular, but just in general, when we only hear it one-sided, it becomes difficult because I don't think that the entirety of the circumstances is really being communicated so that we can truly address the issue.
And that's not diversity.
So I just
not inclusion. Right.
Yeah,
that's not inclusion. That's not diversity. Exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the other side of that conversation, kind of playing devil's advocate a little bit, just so we can make sure that we capture everything versus, you know what I'm saying, only seeing it from one perspective.
No voice should be lost. No voice should be lost. Everyone's voice has to be included. Yeah.
Great.